Welcome to this edition of Decryptage on Africa 24 English to talk about unprecedented opportunities to strengthen trade ties between Africa and the Caribbean. We are receiving Mr. Chad Blackman, Minister of Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. Mr. Chad Blackman, thank you for joining us on Africa 24. The International Trade Center reports that less than 0.1% of African exports and less than 3% of Caribbean exports currently flow between these regions. What concrete steps do you suggest to increase this trade volume significantly, and how do you plan to achieve the projected $1.8 billion in trade by 2028?
Figures that you quoted really tell a story. It tells a story that really won. Notwithstanding that there are a lot of goods and services in the Caribbean and Africa, there's still work to be done in terms of moving them between our two regions. And one of the things that we have to do, which has already started, is one, to create a level of demand and awareness as to what products and services exist in the two regions. Second of all, we have to ensure that we promote our culture, we promote our infrastructure, we promote what we have in both regions, and that will then create the demand for the goods and services to flow. Already, Barbados, for example, some 3 years ago, when it held the first Africa meeting with the Afrexim Bank, it provided the platform for the Caribbean and Africa to see the potential that we have between all two regions. And already, we would have waived visas for Africans into Barbados. What does that do? It allows, therefore, for persons who ordinarily had to travel through Europe to the Caribbean to now have the ability to do so directly. But there's still a barrier. Why? Because air transport is a major platform, but equally there are no direct flights. But the government of Barbados and a number across the region are working with the governments, particularly in West Africa and Southern Africa, so that there can be direct airlift. That's one part of it. The other part is there has to be some level of intra-regional trade mechanism that allows for that greater movement of goods and services. And already this year, you would have heard a number of governments between Africa and the Caribbean talking about the creation of an Africa-Caribbean trade infrastructure, as it were.
How can governments of both regions work together with private sector players in shipping and logistics to create more efficient trade routes?
That is going to be key, because why? Of course, governments regulate. That's what the business of government, to create that framework for the private sector. But it's really the private sector that has to now drive it forward. And the logistics framework is going to be critical if we're going to see these goods moving across our two regions. This year, Barbados would have held the first ever global supply chain forum, looking at the issues of removing the bottlenecks with respect to supply chains. Africa, of course, given that you now have the continental free trade area, you now have a comparative advantage in ensuring that as you build out your trading capacity on the continent, that you can also look to ensure that your supply chain mechanism is forward-looking, it is based on green models, and therefore as you look to export, not just to the Caribbean, but out to the rest of the world, you have an infrastructure that is fit for purpose, is green, and is resilient. And I also want to take this opportunity to say that Barbados has now taken the bold step of repositioning our economy to become a major logistics hub, not just for the Caribbean, but for Latin America and the Caribbean and the Americas. Why? Because of our geographic location, the country is well positioned to be that jurisdiction where companies can have their products coming in and out of Barbados, moving throughout the rest of the world. And our ease of doing business is going to also help us to drive that as well.
Given the potential for collaboration between Africa and the Caribbean, how can African expertise and resources be integrated into the Caribbean's pharmaceutical industry to create a sustainable sector?
Already you're seeing a level of cooperation with Rwanda. Rwanda, of course, having its own pharmaceutical industry, is working strategically with Barbados and Guyana so as to build out that pharmaceutical partnership already. Now, you would have seen, for example, unfortunately, COVID was a major challenge in terms of providing access to quality pharmaceuticals to our markets, but it created an opportunity. And given the expertise and technology transfer that is now in Africa, and also given the life skills capability in the Caribbean, our two regions, and in particular those three countries I mentioned, Rwanda, Barbados, and Guyana, are working strategically so as to not just provide for our three respective markets, but can provide for Africa and can provide for the Caribbean for domestic consumption and also for exporting, so that therefore should there be another pandemic, we have the capacity to be able to treat to our domestic populations. But equally outside of pandemics, we have to build our capacity to be a trading region that can meet the needs of pharmaceutical needs going forward for our everyday use in healthcare. The Caribbean continues, of course, to have its challenges with respect to non-communicable diseases, but as we treat to build out that capacity in addressing that, how do we ensure that the pharmaceutical industry is well aligned in meeting the demands of our health requirements, our population, and in so doing creating a population that can treat its capacity going forward in a very modern and sophisticated way.
You took part in the 8th edition of the Future Investment Initiative held in Riyadh, the capital city of Saudi Arabia. How do you believe this conference can serve as a pivotal platform for the Caribbean? Specifically, what opportunities for investment, collaboration, and innovation do you see arising from such a global gathering that could address development goals of Caribbean nations?
Well, first, let me say that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has to be given its due regard and commendation for putting on such an event like this. I think that it's now not just the first in iteration, but it continues to be, in my view, the Davos of investment globally. And why is this important? As the world continues to have financial flows, in the global north, there's, of course, a high concentration of wealth, and in the global south, there's a high concentration of wealth. The question is, how do you get that wealth moving throughout both the global north and the global south? And what Saudi Arabia has been able to do, and long may it be so, is to be able to say to the world, come to Saudi Arabia and to discuss where is the future of investments. Not just investments in the traditional areas of finance, in investment in areas of infrastructure and pharmaceuticals, but really, as the name says, investing in the future. How do we ensure that the area of artificial intelligence and new technologies, as they come to market and as they develop more, countries, particularly also in the global south, can see where these trends are going and reposition their economies to be able to respond to those needs and opportunities. And therefore, for example, Barbados is here because why? We see the importance of the future of investment, and our country, of course, being not only a tourism hub, but also a business hub globally, see the need to be in a space like this where the conversations are taking place on the future of what investments look like. Our country, of course, we continue to be a jurisdiction that many countries and companies in particular see Barbados as a viable investment jurisdiction. And therefore, we are working with partners here, bilateral discussions, and spreading the message that Barbados continues to be open for business. And thirdly, and importantly, to say the future of investment also has to be underscored by sustainability.
Mr. Chad Blackman, Minister of Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados, thank you for answering Africa 24 English questions. Thank you for following this edition of Decryptage. There are more programs coming up on Africa 24 English.